Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, a statewide solution. Lawmakers in Santa Fe explain how a new bill would codify reproductive rights and nullify local abortion bans.
Already, access is difficult here. We don't want to add fear on top of it or confusion about what the laws are. This is about ensuring that people are not scared to get the health care they need.
And the top lawyer at the firm that helped lead the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit assesses the state's response to that ruling. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. We're back inside the Roundhouse this week as lawmakers consider House Bill 7, proposed legislation that would block local anti-abortion ordinances throughout the state. In less than 15 minutes, New Mexico in Focus political correspondent Gwyneth Dolan asks leaders their thoughts on the proposed bill. Then coming up in the second half of our show, our line opinion panelists discuss that proposed health care bill and how it will impact smaller municipalities and the state as a whole. But we start with public safety, as Albuquerque's newest approach to community policing has caught the attention of the national media. Let's get to the line. Welcome to our line opinion panelists for the week. We're happy to be joined by, in studio by the way, Serge Martinez. He's a professor at the UNM School of Law. We're also joined today by two former New Mexico State senators, always a big deal. Senator Dianne Snyder right here on this side of the table. Senator Dede Feldman right over here on the other side besides Serge. Great to see you all. Now let's get going here. Our first topic today concerns public safety. A unique local approach to community policing was highlighted this month by the New Yorker, that's a magazine in case you don't know, as the national publication wrote about the Albuquerque Community Safety Responders. Fairly new city department created in 2020, that's pretty new. ACS has 54 full-time behavioral health crisis responders who mostly field calls related to mental health and homelessness that previously would have gone, Senator Stein, I'm going to start with you, to police officers or other first responders. And we're talking 1,500 911 calls a month. It's amazing. Of the more than 20,000 total calls they've responded to, less than 1% required eventual police involvement. And let me stop there. This was brought up years ago that we don't always need people with guns and batons and uniforms and, handling mental health issues. How do you like this program? Is this how you see it?
Well, it goes back to, you say, it's been on the forefront of discussion for many years. Back when I worked with the Emergency Physicians Association, that was one of the things they talked about and they were putting in place additional training, which I never saw publicized any place, but there were specialty people, they were still paramedics, but they were going out when it was more a behavioral health issue, rather than sending a complete ambulance and stuff. Now they had a big van kind of thing, so that if there was a true emergency, physical emergency of some kind, it would provide. And the whole idea goes back to how few and what a shortage of medical professionals we have in New Mexico, which is really a whole big different story. But this was my first affiliation with it, to understanding that you don't need a police officer every time. Now, I think it places a burden on the person, the 911 operator, helping do things. And as I saw, it looks like it pops up, and these not licensed, what is it called?
Sure.
Not police officers. The
ACS folks, yeah.
The ACS, thank you. That they look at it and say, okay, I can do this. They have become very familiar with certain things in certain people and recurring instances. The main thing that I see it doing is it frees up officers to go to, our violent crime and our residential crime is so high right now. We need those people who have that ability and the weapons, if necessary, to go out and do it. Now, as I understand, these people are well trained, and which one of the things they're trained on is how to make the decision: do they need to escalate it up to the next level? I think that's very important. But let
me cut in there just for a quick second, Senator, because I got something else for you here in a quick second. I want to get to Senator Feldman on this. Civilian staff are doing internal investigations as well as assisting with criminal investigations. That's not for the layperson. if you get my drift here, you got to be, law enforcement is a fairly, you got to have something behind you to be able to do these kind of things. Does that make you uncomfortable, knowing there were civilians, people doing this kind of work?
Well, the police themselves don't like doing that work.
That's a good point.
And so, they would rather be out on the street.
Right.
And so, it seems to me that there's a lot of people in the criminal justice field that can do that kind of investigation. Sure. Private investigators, even students who are studying criminal justice at UNM, and many others. So it doesn't bother me. I think it's really a good idea to free up the police. We're not ever going to have, I think, 1,300 police, as they say we really need.
Let me interrupt you there. Is that the point? Have we come to some kind of reality about our recruitment possibilities here? In this program is just an acknowledgement of a reality. We're not going to get to that 1,300 or 1,400 number.
I've heard the mayor say that.
Yeah.
I've heard the mayor say that, and he says, we need to use creative technological fixes as well as civilians, technological fixes like speed cameras so that police don't have to be, doing traffic stops and, all kinds of other. They have this shot spotter now that, can be used. That's a technological fix.
That's right.
License plate readers, that kind of thing. So I think it all makes sense, and I think it's all very doable. Yeah. They need to fund it, though. They need to fund it well.
Like
I mean, it's just getting off the ground.
That's right.
It's just getting off the ground.
Can I just add one quick thing in?
Sure.
Is doing the research on media, Facebook, Twitter, all those kinds of things. That work has to be done by somebody.
Right.
So have the officers out on the street with crime, and even I can go and do research. Like, I'm not applying.
Well,
but,
you might get recruited for saying that. On Senator's point, Serge, these folks make up the Digital Intelligence Team, which is a unit they created in the past couple of years to assist detectives in combing through social media, analyzing phone data and video. And they're also filling in positions on the auto theft unit, which is a big deal, as bait car technicians in the crime lab. There's a lot of crime nerds out there, and I use that respectfully. Citizens, and what I mean by that is citizens who want to contribute to the betterment of our, society here in Albuquerque. And they are very supportive of the police. They want to be associated with the police department. You see what I mean? Yeah. Why is this not a good thing to allow regular citizens to pitch in and do their thing here?
But, you and I both know that there's probably, probably most of these people are probably well-meaning and will want to do the right thing. There's probably some, we might say, cowboys out there who are like, yoo-hoo,
could happen,
right? And would maybe get a little bit drunk with that authority or power. But generally, I think, the more we move away from this idea that police officers must do all things at all times and be responding, as we've talked about, right, to mental health issues, to traffic stops, to a cat up in a tree, right, to doing the, all the stuff that you don't really need. Like, they're trained to respond to really tense, potentially violent situations, right? But there's a lot that doesn't require that, and I think it's great to be thinking about different ways that we can be, allocating the responsibilities and resources in our system.
That's right.
One way that other cities have tackled this is to give the fire department more authority. Firemen are really trusted by the populace rather than police officers who have had some problems. And so in cities like Santa Fe and elsewhere around the country, they're using paramedics. And remember, firemen are EMTs. Many of them. And so they can handle some of these calls that, remember, 911 calls, it's a question of diversion, as Diane says. And it's also a question of diversion from the emergency rooms, because they need to have people appropriately treated outside of the emergency room so that the behavioral health problems, the homeless problems, the alcoholics are not just calling 911 because they want to get a hot meal at the hospital.
That's right.
You know, there are these vehicles now, like in Santa Fe, there's a mobile health unit. And the mobile health unit includes a fireman, includes a behavioral health specialist, includes a social worker, sometimes includes a pharmacist. And they go out and they respond to calls as they are diverted to them. They are specializing in street people who are on the street. Some other units like this specialize in isolated elderly people who call 911 because they have fallen and need to be picked up. They don't need to go to the emergency room. They just need to be settled.
Let me get a couple things in. We've just got about a minute here. I want to start with Senator Snyder. Chief Medina is very supportive of this. The president of the Albuquerque Police Department Union is not. Sean Willoughby has had some tough quotes about this, meaning, sworn police officers' job to civilians will, quote, blow up in this police department's face, end quote. Is he being over the top here? Does he have a legit point, or?
It's interesting because I tried to reach a couple of retired police officers that I know to see what the objections were, and I didn't, and I almost gave up and called Sean this morning. But I didn't quite understand why he had those thoughts. Everything, I will say, everything, every new program we start can possibly blow up.
That's a good point.
But to me, it goes back to that training. You've got to train the people who are out doing this so we don't end up with one of the cowboys out on the street.
That's right. ACLU is supportive. This is a lot of interesting bedfellows here for this idea. It's very interesting.
Well,
yeah, please.
I don't know that it's going to affect the conduct of police when it comes to brutality or shootings.
Right. Which is what they were inferring, the ACLU, when they talked about this program, that it'll bring some transparency to the blues, so to speak. Not quite sure.
But it also might prevent a lot of calls and crime.
That's an
Right, if
interesting
you're
point there.
dealing with the mental capacity issues, then maybe that doesn't become a threat.
Interesting there. Thanks to our line opinion panel for that one. We'll meet back here in about 10 minutes to talk about legislation under consideration that would protect reproductive and gender-affirming health care coverage around the state.
I think what they're missing is the importance of education to New Mexico's economy. So a lot of times, regardless of party, and not just in New Mexico, but in other states, these cases result in debates about money. How much money can be expended on education? And it's very short-sighted not to understand that an investment today in ensuring an equal and equitable and adequate education for all students pays off in the future in the economy.
New Mexico is a step closer to codifying abortion rights. Wednesday evening, the House Judiciary passed a bill out of committee that would guarantee access to reproductive and gender-affirming health care for anyone in the state. The legislation has gotten a lot of recent attention, including criticism from Republicans who've worried the bill was too broad. New Mexico in Focus political correspondent Gwyneth Dolan went to the Roundhouse to gain a better understanding of what's inside the bill and what it would mean for New Mexicans if passed.
Representative Serrato, thank you so much for talking to us today. We are looking at the Reproductive and Gender Affirming Freedom Act. What kind of health care is involved in that umbrella? What are we talking about?
So we're looking at the full spectrum of reproductive health care. And it's really important because from the moment you get pregnant, you want to be able to access prenatal health care all the way through, to your entire pregnancy. And the reason that matters is that the line between an emergency C-section and a pregnancy and birth plan that goes exactly to plan is instantaneous, as so many New Mexican mothers and pregnant people know. So we just want to make sure that is fully entailed in there. And then we've also included gender affirming care as well, which is bodily autonomy. And that's included to ensure that people are able to get all of the necessary health care they may need as they're looking at their gender identity.
And what are some of the examples of what that means?
Yeah, so I mean, especially behavior or therapy or other understandings, what we do know about gender affirming care is that it is suicide prevention. And when young people especially are recognized, it significantly reduces their numbers of drug use, suicide rates. It really helps them feel like they're part of a community. And that's what we're really about in New Mexico, is that everyone can do their things, but it's important that they feel embraced by our communities.
So aren't people already free to do all of these things? Like, why do we need a law to protect this?
Yeah, so I often talk about when I was pregnant with my first, I had gestational diabetes. And the last 6 to 8 weeks, you go in twice a week for just a 20-minute ultrasound, make sure everything's good. And I was meeting, and this was here in Santa Fe, and I was meeting women that came from hour-plus commutes. They were coming all the way from Taos and beyond because they couldn't get this kind of basic prenatal care. So already, access is difficult here. We don't want to add fear on top of it or confusion about what the laws are. And additionally, we know in New Mexico that people, may live in Chavez County, but they go to Sandoval to get health care. And we want to make sure there's no question about when they're making the best decisions for their health and their family's health, and they're doing that with their doctors, they're not scared that when they go home, they're going to be persecuted or prosecuted.
So do we have evidence that this persecution and prosecution is happening?
We have examples from other states about how a lot of this is coming out. I have a couple of friends that had to have abortions later in pregnancy, and for them it was a tragedy. They went home to empty nurseries, and that was very difficult for them. But they were able to get the health care they needed, and they were able to have babies later. And that made that was what they needed. I think some of the cases we're seeing come out of Texas, these folks end up having hysterectomies. And that's very difficult to completely alter the plan they had. So again, this is about ensuring that people are not scared to get the health care they need.
And what happens if you do not succeed in making this law?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the biggest concerns is that we're going to have just this checkerboard of healthcare laws and policies and how they're applied to people. And again, 8 out of 10 maternal deaths are preventable. We need to know that we're not scared to get the healthcare to ensure that we're reducing that number of maternal deaths.
Representative Serrato, thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Representative Jones, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
The sponsor of the bill earlier today told us that this is about protecting access to health care. She spoke as a mom about her own pregnancies, about protecting access to health care from prenatal care to childbirth, birth control and abortion, and gender affirming care. Is this how you see this bill in terms of protecting access to care?
I think that I understood that that was their intent, but I think there's so much more to this bill, and it was so broad that it was not really clear that that was the extent of it. It seemed much more vague, much more broad, and I think the questions weren't really answered in terms of protection, as she was saying.
So what are your concerns?
I represent people, and of course this bill would affect everyone in New Mexico, not just my constituents, but I heard from hundreds. If you include the signatures, over thousands of people that were very concerned and even opposed to this bill because they thought it was so broad, and it would cause people who were paid by the state in any capacity to be unable to have the freedom to not be involved or be involved in perhaps their students' concerns or issues, and that they might somehow be held accountable for something that they felt was really wrong.
There's a difference between being forced to do something and being prevented from interfering. And is that a meaningful distinction for you?
Well, of course that's meaningful. I think the possibility of being prosecuted either way, and about how unclear that was, because not only would a person be subject to a $5,000 fine, but all of the court costs, etc. It leaves it pretty broad and open as to what a person would be liable for if they either did or did not do what the state was mandating in the bill, which was unclear.
So you are a nurse, you have experience in healthcare. Does that give you more insight than the average person into how things like this work?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it really does. I just have a great deal of respect for the freedom, our individual freedoms, and I do know what families go through, what children go through, especially children, which I feel like we focused on in the committee. As a pediatric nurse for many years in all areas of pediatrics, I have a special heart for kids and their families, and I want to make sure that they do receive the care that they need, and that at the same time that they're not required by the state to either do or not do what they feel is wrong.
The sponsor told us in terms of the gender affirming care part of it, she was very blunt. She said this is about suicide prevention. She said when young people get this care, they are less likely to have severe psychological issues and try to kill themselves. Does that resonate? Is that something that's important to you?
Of course it is, absolutely. I would like to see that research. I think that there are all sorts of things that young people experience in growing up that cause them mental trauma, and I know that certainly, being uncertain about their gender is one of them. How that really affects, how that plays out in research is a question for me. I think I know also of people, and it was discussed in the committee that there's the other side too of those who did receive the gender affirming care who felt like it was not the right thing in the end and have turned around the other direction. So there's kind of both sides there to look at, and I would like to see more research on that. I think it's hard to say that with as little time that's gone by. We need to look, that's one thing we'll be looking at in the future.
Marshall Martinez, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We are trying to figure out how this bill really works. Help us understand, would this require anyone to participate in healthcare, abortion, birth control, gender affirming care that they don't agree with? Would it force them to do that?
No, absolutely not. And in fact, healthcare providers always have the ability to refuse to provide care that they disagree with, to refer a patient to another provider. And also, it should be noted that healthcare providers only provide the kind of care they're trained to provide. What this bill does is ensure that local governments, public entities don't stop people from accessing the healthcare they need.
And so, who are the kind of workers that we're talking about? I mean, people are like, is this me? Is this the job that I do? What are we talking about here? Doctors, nurses?
Yeah, we're talking about therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, right? We're talking about behavioral health specialists. We are talking about some physicians, nurse practitioners, physicians assistants.
Teachers?
We've been hearing teachers, school nurses, guidance counselors. Those folks don't provide health care, and this bill is not going to require anyone to provide health care that they're not trained to do. We expect teachers to create a safe classroom for their students and educate them. We expect school nurses to handle emergencies. We expect guidance counselors to be there for students to answer questions, to listen to them. Those folks should all refer them to folks in their community, the resources that they might need. But this bill in no way asks a teacher or anyone else who isn't normally a healthcare professional to suddenly provide healthcare.
So if I'm a school nurse who does not believe that abortion is the right thing to do for a teenager, and they ask me to how they can get information or help about it, would this require me to give them that information?
No, this bill would just require that school nurse answer questions honestly, and we think and we hope that those school nurses, regardless of their own personal beliefs, would refer that young person to the resources that exist in their community. And it's really important to know that what we're saying is we don't want school districts, counties, cities to say this type of healthcare is not allowed here, or we will stop folks from accessing this healthcare.
There seems to be some confusion about what gender-affirming healthcare means. For those of us at home who are kind of trying to wrap our minds around it, what are some examples? What does that mean?
Gender affirming healthcare almost always starts and maintains being mental and behavioral health care. When we send trans folks, especially young trans folks, to access gender affirming care, what we mean is giving them access to a therapist, to a psychiatrist, psychologist, licensed counselor who will affirm their identity and help them process what it means to live in this world and the trauma that many trans people experience in this world with the lack of understanding and the stigma around trans folks. So we immediately hear all of these ideas about surgeries and all of the, and some folks access medical care, but not every trans person accesses surgical care. Not every trans person wants medical care, including prescriptions. What we know every trans person wants, needs, and deserves is behavioral and mental health care. To be in a safe space where their identity is affirmed, where they can work out what that means, and how to walk through this world on a daily basis. And it should be noted that gender affirming healthcare is suicide prevention. What we know is that this is the #1 indicator that a young trans person will live into adulthood without attempting or successfully committing suicide. Giving them access to life-saving, gender-affirming care, which is almost always behavioral and mental health care first.
Thank you, Gwyneth, and welcome back to our line panelists. Now, let's talk through the legislation on the table here. As Gwyneth explained, House Bill 7 would stop counties and municipalities from preventing public access to reproductive or gender-affirming health care. It would not force anyone who was religiously or morally opposed to actively participate in any form of that care. That's important. Now, the bill would also overrule local abortion ordinances that have been created since the Roe v. Wade was overturned last year. Now, in places like Lee and Roosevelt counties, Hobbs, Clovis, and Eunice, opponents of this bill have said this would remove the rights of local governments to govern. Is this legislation the way we should address this on the state level? Serge Martinez, let me ask you. It's a very fundamental question, whether local municipalities should have the right to decide for themselves versus the state. Where do you come down on this?
In this case, this is easy, right? It's a fundamental right here in New Mexico to, the right to privacy, the right to health care, that doesn't stop when you cross the city line or cross the county line, right? States have the authority to preempt, municipalities from doing laws in lots and lots and lots of areas. This one, which is so fundamental and so clearly a right in New Mexico, I think the legislation is superfluous, right? These laws are unenforceable, I think. But you know what? I applaud the legislature if it, passes this for saying, just to remove any doubt, right? New Mexicans have these rights no matter where they go in the state and no matter what the local folks are saying.
Dee Dee, I'm curious where you think this should come down to. Is this overstepping the rights of local municipalities? I know you're strong on, local munis having their say on things, but what about it in this case?
Well, I'm not sure that this really is a local issue, because there is one man that is going around the country encouraging these municipalities, often in border areas, to enact these ordinances simply to get a nationwide abortion ban and to create a court case that then maybe can work its way up to the Supreme Court. It's another example for me of how much discord between states, between parties, the Dobbs decision really created. And so now we're talking about local versus state and state versus state. That's the legacy of the Dobbs decision.
That's right.
And we're going to be living with it for some time.
Yeah. Interesting. Senator Snyder, the bill, this is an interesting point here. The bill would allow the state attorney general or a DA the right to initiate a civil lawsuit in district court if they feel a government body has acted to deny or prevent the legal right to obtain reproductive health care services. And a fine could be charged up to $5,000. I'm curious how that hits you in your gut. Do we need the DA looking over people's shoulders on this? Something just seems a little heavy-handed here, but I'm wondering where you might be coming down on this.
I have several things, great concerns about this. One is the very initial thing. I'm very much a Jeffersonian, and I believe that in the rights of the local, politics is in the community. That's where you are. We're not the same in every part of our state. Our beliefs are different. So does the state, the state legally has the right to say, you can't do this, we're taking away your power to do it. Same thing they can do with school boards, et cetera. But what in doing a little research on this though, the thing I found so interesting is New Mexico is very much a blue state, Democratic, very progressive. Texas, our next door neighbor, is a red state, very conservative, very much Republican controlled. And yet, the city of Austin, which by the way, abortions are illegal in the state of Texas, all kinds of little things, I'm not going into the details, but the city of Austin, municipal leaders, they're city councilors, I think they call them also, and what they're doing is they're adopting non-enforcement regulations or non-prosecution regulations, or because they can't tell an entity that you have to break the law, the state law. But what you can do is you can say, okay, we're determining that when you go out for an emergency or to enforcement, looking for and following up on the story or the actions or the whatever, that concerns about abortion are down at the very bottom. So that you're not going to be then go on to be prosecuted for it, and that they're telling their DAs, county attorneys, et cetera, is this will be your priority way down on the bottom, so that they can continue to have the safe abortion services in Austin. It's just a reversal of what's in New Mexico.
That's right.
Yes, it is. It is, because
they're so fundamentally different. The idea of these places in New Mexico are saying there's a fundamental right that the New Mexico State Constitution gives you, and we're saying you don't have it in our town, right? Versus in Austin, Texas, you don't have a fundamental right to have your neighbor get in trouble for having an abortion, right? Which is really what is being taken away by the Austin saying we're not going to enforce this. It's still a state law. It's still and I don't know Texas law well enough to know who enforces it, but Texas state law doesn't go away just because Austin isn't enforcing it. Whereas,
but if we keep moving in that direction, then passing the cannabis laws we passed are not legal, because the federal government still says they're not. It is a drug that is not on the list of being able to be prescribed.
Still a type 3.
Yes,
right,
so to me, it's what the point I'm trying to make here is it's looking for other ways to promote your personal opinion. And it doesn't matter whether you're a red state and the blueies are trying to change this through their legal process, or whether you are a blue state and the red counties are trying to do it.
Let me ask Senator Feldman, interesting, a lot of activity down south about this, local anti-abortion ordinances. We're seeing stand behind the 1873 Comstock Act. Now, before you're at home running to your phone, what you can double screen. That's the way we live life right now. You can look this up. But basically, the stance is, Senator Feldman, that sending medical equipment for abortions violates a 150-year-old federal statute that states it's illegal to send anything obscene, immoral, or indecent through the mail.
And that includes birth control pills.
There you go.
And that includes the day after pills.
Yeah.
And this is why I think they are relying on this obscure federal law to try to force a lawsuit, to try to get a nationwide prohibition in all states, which many women rely on stuff coming through the mail.
Right.
And if they can interfere with interstate commerce in that way, then they can ban abortion nationwide. And that's what they would like to do.
Interesting.
It just goes to my point, though, that whichever side you're on, whichever stand you're taking, you're going to search and look for every possible method or a way to get your opinion and your beliefs in place.
but that's where we look to the law. And
Right. Well, on that point, if this bill is passed and abortion is codified, does that end the conversation about reproductive rights here in New Mexico? I mean, besides pushback from anti-abortion people, if this passes? There's a lot of layers here.
I agree with Diane on that. It will not end it. It will not end it for sure.
One more door closed.
Now,
just
if
one
it was
more.
in the Constitution, it might be a different story. It might be a different story.
Yes. Interesting. Serge, your thought on that? I'm interested to.
Oh no, I mean,
Yeah.
Texas is still going to be our neighbor, and these things down south are a lot of ways. Texas trying to make sure that its law creeps over the border into New Mexico.
Also, another city is Tucson, so it's both sides of
That's
it.
right. That's right.
Yeah, it's these. No, there's no end to the creativity and tenacity of people who are trying to push
Let me go
this
back to
issue.
something Senator Felden mentioned about who was behind this and all the activity. What happens if House Bill 7 were to pass? Could this eventually escalate beyond to the state Supreme Court? As you mentioned earlier, is that the goal here? Is to get a Supreme Court case?
Well, I think the Attorney General is already involved with it.
He is.
And
Absolutely.
he is trying to prevent these local ordinances as a violation of state law.
Okay.
So that will continue. I'm not sure that House Bill 7 will be challenged in court. I think it would probably be something else that would be challenged.
That's right. Let me mention, I'm glad you mentioned Raul Torres, New Mexico Attorney General, Senator Snyder. He asked the state Supreme Court to consider the matter.
Yes.
He sees where the end game is going, and it's interesting here. Would it matter to you if it went to the Supreme Court, and would you have a prediction about how it would fall if it actually went that far?
No, I wouldn't object. I think that the method, again, the process is which again, of all issues, if you're going to the courts, you've got two different sides. And so the process is there for anyone to use. So I do not object to the process of going to the Supreme Court. I think that Mr. Torres will run into some conflicts with county attorneys and others that he affiliates with.
I can't help but smile a little bit and
Yeah.
understanding of Mr. Torres running for statewide office. Like, here we are. Now you get this little tiny thing you got to deal with.
Yeah.
Thanks again to our panelists for that discussion. We'll be back in less than 10 minutes for a discussion on the growing number of doctors leaving our state. I'll ask our panelists why it's happening and what solutions are out there. But first, an update on a key court case mandating major changes in how our state educates its most vulnerable students. The Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund represents Luis Martinez, one of the lead plaintiffs in the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. New Mexico in Focus correspondent Russell Contreras recently caught up with MALDEF's president and general counsel to talk about the ongoing state response to that historic court ruling.
Thomas, thank you for joining us again here on New Mexico in Focus.
Happy to be here.
It's been 11 years since the fight that we now call Martinez-Yazzie started. First off, give us a quick reminder what this battle is about and what's the update.
Basically, the case is about the right to an equitable and adequate education in the New Mexico public schools. So ever since the United States Supreme Court half a century ago concluded that the U.S. Constitution does not treat education as a fundamental right, we have been left with raising challenges like this in state court under state constitutions. So, in New Mexico, the Martinez case is the case that established that under New Mexico's state constitution, there is a constitutional right to an adequate and equitable education. So where we are today is after a lengthy trial in which the state court did conclude there was a violation of that right under the New Mexico state constitution in the current New Mexico public school system. So the question since then has been about the adequacy of the remedy for that violation. So the state legislature has acted to increase some of the funding for public education, to make other reforms, and really what's going on now is a lengthy determination through evidence gathering, through testimony, of whether the problem has been solved or not, or whether there remains a violation of the New Mexico Constitution. And the case was brought, as you know, on behalf of students who really were not receiving an equitable education in New Mexico public schools, and that includes those with special education, includes Latino students, it includes Native students, it includes making sure that all students receive an equitable opportunity to succeed in public schools.
Now, at this point, this battle, these lawsuits have gone through a Republican administration and a Democratic administration. Both have fought these lawsuits. From your perspective, what are they missing in continuing to fight these lawsuits, appeal, and keep them in the court system?
I think what they're missing is the importance of education to New Mexico's economy. So a lot of times, regardless of party, and not just in New Mexico, but in other states, these cases result in debates about money. How much money can be expended on education? And it's very short-sighted not to understand that an investment today in ensuring an equal and equitable and adequate education for all students pays off in the future in the economy with more students who graduate well prepared to do the jobs of the 21st century, well prepared to innovate, well prepared to advance the economic progress of the entire state. So it's often a failure to see the long-term economic benefits and instead making decisions based on short-term budgetary concerns.
On that note, I've talked to Democratic lawmakers. They've told me, look, I believe the goals of these lawsuits, but we can't let the courts decide something that we can't afford. This is a very similar argument that we've heard before, that this needs to be done legislatively. What's your reaction to that?
Well, unfortunately, the legislature hadn't met its constitutional obligation under New Mexico's Constitution, and in that circumstance, the courts have to intervene. Now, the courts are not dictating how much money is to be spent, or even specifically how it is to be spent, but both of those play some role in determining whether there is an ongoing constitutional violation or it has been remedied, which means the courts have to look at, is there an adequate investment for all students in the state? And they have to look at, are the right mechanisms to monitor, document, and then remedy any continued disparities, discriminations in New Mexico's public schools. So I wish that the historical track record of the legislature here and in other states was such that they had demonstrated the ability to address the imperative of providing an adequate and equitable education to all students. But that is not the track record. So courts have to intervene to ensure that the New Mexico Constitution, the voice of the people who ratified it, is reflected in an ongoing way in the education system.
On that note, with the passage of the Constitutional Amendment number 1, freeing up more money for public education on top of other funding advancements and a massive oil and gas surplus we have in New Mexico, is there a lack of money? Is that argument against responding to the needs highlighted in this lawsuit? Because we have all this going on. One would assume that this could be easily solved.
Well, what you're pointing out is it's always a matter of where to spend the money that's available. It's a matter of priority setting. Is education going to be the top priority? These recently enacted measures are certainly an indication of progress that the voters of New Mexico believe that education should be if not the top priority. But the debate about economic constraints is always about where the money that's available should be allocated. Should it be allocated to schools, or should it be allocated elsewhere in terms of the many government functions? So again, these measures are an important indication that the people believe that education should be the priority, including allocating additional resources to solve the problem of providing an equal and adequate education for all students.
Now, Chicano pioneer and scholar George I. Sanchez here in New Mexico wrote about inequality in the state in 1940 with his book, The Forgotten People. It appears some of the complaints in these lawsuits are going back to his critique almost a century ago. Why is it that New Mexico, after all these years, all these decades, cannot wrap its head around equality and equity for Mexican American and Native American students in the state?
Well, I think we have the long-term legacy of discrimination against those two groups and others that was so built into the system 100 years ago, built into the system ever since. When something is systemic, it's very hard to root it out. And what we have in this circumstance is a failure of some of the main mechanisms of accountability to take part. I place a lot of the blame, and it's not just in New Mexico, it's nationwide, on the decision, which will be 50 years old this year, by the United States Supreme Court out of the neighboring state of Texas, when the justices, by a narrow majority, concluded that education is not a fundamental right under our federal Constitution. When they reached that decision, it essentially meant that the federal government would not play a significant role in ensuring equal opportunity in education, as it does in other arenas. And ironically, as it had in the foundational civil rights case of Brown versus Board of Education, which was about educational equity. And yet, in 1973, they withdrew from playing a major role. That then made it possible for those systemic, deeply rooted problems to continue and be perpetuated through decade and decade up to today. So this, again, is not a problem solely in New Mexico. It is really a problem with public education across the country because we have these deeply rooted systemic inequities, and then we have not allocated the right resources, players, mechanisms to ensure that that systemic problem can be solved.
Time to welcome back our panelists for one final discussion. Doctors and medical practitioners across the board have been leaving New Mexico, and local lawmakers aren't sure what to make of it. According to the New Mexico Healthcare Workforce Annual Report, New Mexico is below the national benchmark for its number of primary care physicians, psychiatrists, OBGYN practitioners, and general surgeons. The journal reports most local doctors point to is 2021's medical malpractice law, which raised the cap on damages and increased the cost of medical malpractice insurance. Senator Feldman, that increased rate is somewhere between 2 or 3 times the rates found in Colorado, Arizona, Texas. Should we be surprised here at this result?
The increasing cost of medical malpractice insurance is one piece of the puzzle. But our shortages in the health workforce predated the passage of the medical malpractice bill, or the lifting of the cap, the medical malpractice. This is an old story. We have always been really short of primary care physicians, especially in the rural areas, and specialists too. And so we have tried various solutions. The malpractice is one part of it. Medicaid is another part of it. And loan forgiveness is another part of it. You know, there are a lot of things that sort of militate against New Mexico when we're attracting doctors here. We've tried to grow our own workforce from UNM with the BA-MD program. That has worked, but it's slow going. It's not like, you know, somebody that graduates from Yale Medical School is going to want to locate in Roy, New Mexico, and their wives are going to wonder, is there a Nordstrom's here? And no, there isn't a Nordstrom's in Roy.
Interesting point there.
Some rack.
Well, there
Maybe
you go.
a rack.
Good enough. Sirs, the numbers are not good here. According to that Healthcare Workforce Committee report, we are 334 primary care physicians below where they say the provider to population benchmark should be. That's a big number. I mean, it's a whole lot of people. I'm a little lost at how we turn that kind of thing around, but again, your sense of where we are with this kind of loss, can we blame it directly on this 2021 bill, or as Dee Dee mentioned, something else going on here as well?
I think it's you know, just too facile to say, oh, we passed this and therefore there's a straight line. Right? I mean, we're a very rural state. It's not just New Mexico. Rural communities around the country have had trouble attracting and retaining doctors, right? And that 330 shortage is not evenly spread throughout the state either, right? It falls more disproportionately on areas that are more rural and have lower populations.
Let me ask you this, though. There's in the journal article, really interesting quote here. Dr. Todd Williams of San Juan Plastic Surgery in Farmington tells the Journal he's paying guys about $65,000 a year in malpractice insurance. He said the same insurance would cost $18,000 a year if he did it in Colorado, just a few miles away. That's a big difference. That's not like a 10% or something.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the kind of thing that, the economics are what they are. That might be the kind of thing that a creative state approach to it would say, look, we can maybe address some of that through helping with those insurance premiums or be a self-insured state.
That's
I don't, I'm...
That answer's yet to be, right.
I have no idea the actual numbers, right? But I'm
Right.
saying it cries out for a creative solution that is not throw up our hands and say, yeah, I guess everyone's going to drive to Colorado.
That's right.
Right? It's to say, okay, if it's purely a money issue, and I know so many things I say, oh, it's just money, right? But like that can be dealt with, right? You can say, oh, if that's all it is, then we can help that and make sure folks stay in Farmington and Roy and whatever, right?
Let me ask Didi on a similar question, and Diane, I want you to get on this too. Some Democratic lawmakers have balked at the idea of rolling this thing back, as you might know, the 2021 legislation, saying the law was a bipartisan compromise, should be given time to work. Is it too early to amend this, say, if we wanted to do this in the session now? Are we jumping the gun here, or should this have some time to sort of play itself out?
I think it will have time to play itself out because it's not going to pass this time. And it's only really been 6 months since the fix, the so-called fix, bipartisan fix was in. Meanwhile, I'm with Serge. I mean, we have to look for some creative fixes to our healthcare system that does not completely depend upon the doctor.
That's right.
The doctor
That's right.
will fix it.
Yeah.
We have to, focus on community health workers and mid-level practitioners and telemedicine projects that will fill the gap in this kind of broken medical system that we have right now.
I know when you were in serving our state in the legislature, I remember you talking about Medicaid reimbursement quite a bit. That's still a big deal here.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's just, and I got to get Senator Snyder in on this. Again, do we fill in the gaps here with other things, or is this the solution? Or
our other two panelists, Serge and Didi, have given very good list, but the one I didn't hear mentioned was the GRT on medical services.
Yes.
That is something they could fix. And also, this agreed to law in 2021, it was a lot of people said this is the best we're going to get right now. We've got to have something. Everybody was not in agreement about it. One of the big changes that's been coming, and I believe was included in this, is hospitals, physicians. There's a difference between private physicians and hospital physicians, and everybody was not included in the Patient Compensation Fund and the Medical Malpractice Act. But when you expand that, that's more people drawing from the pot of the compensation fund, and it was just a token amount of extra money put in. That is another issue they could very easily do this session. And with all the money, when you talk in terms of billions, extra monies, you need to fit in a major problem that impacts everybody. You ought to fix it.
can I read you a quote? You guys all know Democratic Senator Martin Hickey. When he came to Albuquerque, of course, he was a physician, former CEO of Loveless, so I think he kind of knows what he's talking about on this. But he has a great quote here in the Journal. It said the state's patient compensation fund faces, quote, an actuarial death spiral, end quote. If something isn't done, with state government income of nearly $12 billion this year, Serge, as Senator Snyder just made the point, if this is a money fix, why don't we just get after it? We have money.
Like, it's hard to think of anything more important than the health of the people of New Mexico, and ongoing treatment, prevention, and setting up a infrastructure that's going to allow us to have a healthy state. And if our state can't be bothered to focus on this issue, I don't know what we can be.
Let me ask you guys a final question here, kind of a fundamental question we started with. If lawmakers were to roll back, guys, the cap to 600,000, the way it was before the law was changed in 2021, would that automatically solve the problem in your mind's eye, Senator? Is that the problem here?
No,
Okay.
that would definitely not solve the problem. And
Yeah.
remember, it's a balancing act.
Right.
You do have to protect patients.
Yes.
You do have to
That's what it is.
protect consumers.
Yeah.
Patients who have been wronged,
Yes,
specifically.
yes.
That's why malpractice is
That's
there.
right. And so that's why it's always a compromise, the level of the liability.
That's right.
And so, no, it would
But
not.
if there's enough money in the pot, you don't have this underlying debate about should the cap be lower, should the cap be higher, or at least it reduces the pressure. Have more money in the compensation fund. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, but 12 million, it's not a lot of money when you really think about it. Last question, Serge, for you. Again, should just be visited at least in conversation in committee. Doesn't mean that something has to happen. Do you know what I mean? We have to have a conversation. Something's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an issue that definitely warrants discussion and saying, okay, look, we may not fix it right now, but we're
Right.
all committed to addressing this issue because it's so important for
That's
New
right.
Mexico.
On a personal note, this is one of those issues why we need a full-time legislature. You cannot
And
discuss
yes.
these things
That's right.
And yes.
in the format we have now. You just can't. Thanks again to our line panel as always this week. Be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics these wonderful people covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages, and catch any episode you might have missed on the PBS app on your Roku or Smart TV. I wanted to note the passing this week on Thursday, specifically the musical icon Burt Bacharach. Now, I grew up in a Bacharach and Dionne Warwick household. And if you're of a certain vintage, the man's music was a soundtrack for our lives during the 60s. Now, for those who missed it in real time, you likely do know the tunes without knowing it was him. That's how big his work was. Now, what fascinates me to this day about his music is it quietly spoke to folks about love, relationships, the need to stop and listen to what the world is telling you. While at the same time, during the 60s, the nation was roiling in a noisy cultural war that continues to this day. Think about it this way. If in 1970 someone dropped the needle on the Carpenters' smash hit Close to You and told you this song was slated to be a #1 hit, you wouldn't believe it given the times. That's how powerful his work was. Now, for the memory, we've posted a fun YouTube link to the top 20 Burt Bacharach songs, and it's a breathtaking list. The word timeless gets thrown about a lot when it comes to music. Let me suggest this. Go listen to the 1965 Jackie DeShannon hit, What the World Needs Now Is Love. Then come talk to me about Timeless. R.I.P. Burt Bacharach, and thank you. Thanks again for joining us, for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the viewers like you.